I'm just going to give just a little bit of a context of what this meeting is all about. On the phone, we have Lindsay with the Mayor, and they've been working with us on some sectors strategy events. So talking with Julio and Mike Baker and Lisa Jones, who we've been working as a team on this project, we wanted to loop all of the DCO staff on where we're at with this project and give everyone an overview of where we're at, okay, and where we're going, right? So, can you all hear me on the phone?
Yes.
Yes? Very good. Okay. So, I want to point out that sector strategy is something that y'all may be aware of, and are aware that Illinois has been doing some work with industry sectors around the critical skills shortage and Illinois pathways. This initiative is more of a next generation industry sector strategy, okay? And so this is all in the context of WIOA implementation, where we started working with the Community College Board and our other state partners on these regional forums, right? And the idea is to start thinking about the unified plans that are required under WIOA, okay? We also received some technical assistance from USDOL, and that's where Lindsay and her group with Mayor and Mayor come in. They were working with Mike Baker and the Atom Manufacturing Project, and so we saw a lot of connections of different initiatives and how they all kind of roll into our plan for WIOA implementation in Illinois, okay? So that's kind of the groundwork. And so you're all aware that we had these 10 regional forums, kind of laid some planning groundwork. Then we had 3 regional sector strategy convenings where we invited our partners, our WIA partners, both rehab, IDES, community college folks, to talk about the development of this next generation of sector strategy. So it was a kind of a limited space, but we thought it is critically important, if this is one of the pillars that we're going to build WIOA implementation on in Illinois, that you're aware of what's going on. And so that's the purpose of this briefing this afternoon. Again, this is kind of scratching the surface. There's additional information and materials out there. And so that hopefully gives you an introduction of what we're doing. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Lindsay and the rest of the team.
Great, thank you. Can everybody hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, excellent. I wasn't sure if I needed to press any other buttons. So thank you, John, and thanks, everybody. And I'll just pick right up, and we're going to get into the presentation. I'm Lindsay Woolsey. I'm actually with the Woolsey Group, so I am not with Mayor and Mayor, but I am partnering with Mayor and Mayor. I am one of the senior advisors to the ETA Sector Strategy project and national technical assistance efforts. So I'm thrilled that I was able to join in on the technical assistance that is targeted at Illinois. I have watched Illinois and kept track of Illinois' sector strategy efforts for a very long time, including some of the early critical skills shortage initiative efforts of the early and mid-2000s. And so I'm pleased that Illinois, both local stakeholders as well as state leadership, are eager and interested in kind of taking it to the next level. And so what I'd like to present to all of you really is the exact same presentation that we presented to local and regional stakeholders who attended the 3 different regional sector trainings last week. And so that's why you see on the screen, May 19th, 2021, this really is the same presentation. There were other elements of the trainings from last week. Obviously, they were full-day trainings, and we will not be getting into those. This is just going to be the presentation. For those of you who have not seen this, I'll warn you, this is a hefty presentation. So we are going to spend a good amount of time going through this, and then we will open it up for Q&A. If you have questions along the way, of course, please write them down, keep track of them. You can put them into the participant questions and comments, but then we will have time at the end for open Q&A and conversation. But this presentation will take a good 45 minutes, so that's a heads up. Please do pay attention and stay focused. I know it's tough on a webinar sometimes, but this material really does build on itself. So I'm going to see if I can advance my slides here. Yes, I can. So we're going to start off just with a reminder here that there's a lot of language being thrown around that you all probably have seen and are using yourselves. Job-driven, industry-driven, demand-driven, more, better, stronger employer partnerships, industry-driven courses and credentials, industry-driven career pathways, and probably lots of other iterations of this. But part of the point that I want to make here is that no matter where you or local folks sit and work every day, so we could be talking about people who work in community colleges, people who work for voc rehab, people who work within job centers. Okay, this is Lindsay. Can the folks hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so hopefully other lines are muted. And I'll pick up where I left off, which was no matter where you sit, if you are in education, workforce development, even economic development, you are all getting the same call to action. And that is to build more, better, stronger partnerships with industry. And part of the point, and what we emphasized last week at the trainings, was that there is a big risk inherent in this, and that is that each of us will go out and build more, better, stronger partnerships with industry. And so if you can imagine that at a regional level, what you can imagine is that we will end up with a handful, and in some cases up to a half dozen or more, duplicative efforts. And so we will have a college creating a partnership with manufacturers, as well as a workforce area or with a job center, as well as a chamber, maybe a county economic development organization, etc. And this is not, obviously, what the intention behind the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act is. It is not the intention we would imagine from leaders who are giving this call to action. And so it takes some slowing down to speed up, if you will, at the regional level. It takes some very thoughtful approaches to how are we as a region making decisions about which industries to target and how are we going to target them collectively. And that's where the concept of very formal, robust, broad-based sector partnerships come into play. The idea that if we really know that manufacturing is a critical driver of our regional economy, then we as educators, workforce development organizations and supports, economic development, no matter what kind of economic development organization, we are somehow coming to joint agreement on how we are going to build a strong regional partnership of manufacturers or a strong regional partnership of healthcare providers, etc. So if we move on, let me just get us all on the same page about a common definition. And this is the definition that we're using. Sector partnerships are regional. They are local. They are a partnership of companies, of employers within one target industry sector. But this partnership works very closely with government, education and training, economic development, labor, community organizations, and likely other stakeholders to focus on the workforce and other competitiveness needs of their industry. And one thing I'll just highlight here is this and other competitiveness needs, because certainly something that we have noticed over the decades of experience of good sector partnership work is that workforce education and training is always a top priority when you get companies in the same industry in the same region together. But they also have other issues. And sector partnerships that self-sustain, that get deep and broad and skin in the game levels of employer engagement, don't shy away from those other issues. They realize this probably needs to be about more than just education and training if we are to keep employers engaged. And so this is why this definition includes, it's a focus on workforce, but it's also a focus on other competitiveness needs. This last line is also important. These regional partnerships may or may not have support from the state or federal level. And just very quickly, there is a history behind sector strategies where there was a period in our history where we were quite flush with cash. There were foundations, in fact, there were lots of foundations, half dozen, who were interested in putting money into the development of sector partnerships. We had DOL, we had the Department of Education, and we had lots of states putting grants out too. Illinois was one of those. In fact, I think Mike Baker said it was to the tune of about $18 million were put into sector work. One thing that we've noticed nationally is that when money is put on the ground to develop a sector partnership, they develop, people come around the table, but when that money goes away, they don't sustain. And so foundations started pulling money away, and we no longer are in a situation where there's a lot of investment in the development of sector partnerships. Where there is investment is if you have a partnership up and running, investors, including federal government agencies, including states, and including foundations, say, oh, now I can put my money in that safely because I get that it's up and running and it's real, and it's already shown some early wins. So in the best cases, sector partnerships become magnets for investment, and in fact can leverage millions and millions of dollars, and they do. But they don't get started necessarily because they have a grant. In fact, it's a lesson learned that it's not the best way to get them started. If you're somebody who prefers a picture to a verbal definition, here you go. This is what we really see as an employer-driven, community-supported sector partnership graphic. You can see around the inside core table are your employer champions. These are your folks who represent companies in your target sector, whether it's manufacturing, healthcare, trade and logistics, tourism, you name it. You name an industry, we'll find you a sector partnership. They exist in every industry. And it's these companies and it's their voice that really drive the agenda and the priorities and the activities of a good sector partnership. But around that table, you must have critical support partners. And you can see that this includes quite an array. Everything from K through 12, adult-based basic education, your colleges and universities, various community-based organizations, human service organizations and support, organized labor where it's important, and then workforce boards and one-stops, and your economic development organizations too. There are probably even some that are missing here. And one more piece to this picture is that yellow triangle, and that's your convener. And you can call this whatever you want. It's the convener, it's the coordinator, it's the intermediary, which is another common term. But this is an individual in an organization. Sometimes it is a pair of individuals and organizations. There are co-convening models that work very well. But it is the responsibility of this convener to do two things. One, how am I pulling my employers together and facilitating conversations among them that get them to name their priorities, develop their sector partnership agenda, and even commit to rolling up their sleeves and helping with activities and solutions. And on the other hand, how as a convener am I coordinating and building trust across all of the needed community support partners that may be brought to bear in a set of solutions or activities that come out of your industry-driven sector partnership. This is no small task, as you can imagine. It takes staffing, it takes time, and it takes a certain set of skills. And so this convener we see around the country can come out of many types of organizations. We see conveners out of colleges, we see them out of workforce boards, we see them out of job centers, we see them out of community-based organizations, and we see them out of economic development. And in every situation there are pros and cons, but to each of those choices, but fundamentally no matter which choice it is for who the lead convener is or pair of co-conveners, it's important that they be very neutral. They do not bring their own organization's agenda to the table. They are the neutral convener and facilitator of what the industry representation is saying is a priority for their industry. So if we move on from definition, there's a piece here that adds to why we are at this definition. And this is kind of what I'm starting to call the extended family of sector strategies around the country. And this goes back to the history and the evolution of sector strategies. Sector strategies have been around for decades. This is not a new concept. It's not a new thing. We should take faith that also means it's not a fad and not a passing fad. It's fair to say that this is something that has stuck for decades, and it is probably got more staying power than almost any other type of initiative or organizing intervention out there. And so it's important to understand, though, that there's been evolution in sector strategies, and this tree kind of represents that. If you look on your lower left, you see some branches: industry-specific career pathway programs, industry-informed workforce training initiatives, industry-informed entry-level training interventions. And for those of you who are not aware, historically and traditionally, a sector initiative or a sectoral training initiative almost exclusively focused on low-income and entry-level workers. And there was a reason for that. It's because when you organized companies and really effectively had them tell you what their needs were from a demand side, that was your best chance to make sure you were adjusting entry-level training programs appropriately so that very low-skilled and low-income individuals could actually get a foothold in the labor market. So they were an effective vehicle to do this. But if we migrate to the top of the tree, that's where you'll find today's sector strategies. And today's sector strategies focus on much more than just the question of how are we advancing entry level. They still include that. But what we've noticed, as I hinted at earlier, is that they have to include a broader agenda if, in fact, we are going to expect employers to stay engaged over the long term, at a deep level, and at a skin-in-the-game level. And that's because employers just simply need more to chew on. They've got more priorities than just filling their entry-level occupations. Filling entry-level occupations is, in fact, our agenda, right? Our agenda in terms of being a workforce program or perhaps a continuing education branch of a community college. And so it's important to recognize that if you're really going to make this an industry agenda, you have to broaden the scope. And you have to ask them, what's going on in your industry? What are the growth opportunities? What's happening? And if we were to leverage those growth opportunities, what would we need to do? Again, I guarantee you, you're going to get education and training as a top priority, but you're going to get other pieces too. And so the family tree represents kind of the gamut from the traditional focus just on low-income entry-level workers and training to a very broad-based industry-owned agenda that we see in a lot of what I call next-generation sector partnerships today. Finally, over on the right side, you have industry-specific economic development efforts. I won't spend a lot of time here, but it's safe to say that there's plenty of economic development organizations that also target specific industries, but they tend to be just focused on more economic development type initiatives like supply chain mapping or marketing and branding. And so again, if you migrate back up to the top of the tree, broad-based sector partnerships, what you find is we are finding ways for a sector partnership to be the vehicle through which all of this is addressed. Your education and training needs, as well as your other economic development priorities. So, if it hasn't been made clear, here's just a rundown of what today's industry partnerships or sector partnerships look and feel like. They're industry-driven, they are regional, they are convened by a credible third party. They act as a coordinating body across the multiple education, workforce, economic development, and other programs. And in fact, I think maybe the best way to describe this is they really become the single table at which companies can access the vast array of programs that are in their community that are otherwise very hard to navigate. Employers shouldn't have to figure out which program do I go to for what, or shouldn't be saying, didn't you just call me last week? Oh, that wasn't you, that was someone else. The reality is that in most of our communities, it's a lot to navigate, and even us on the public sector side have trouble navigating our own systems. And so sector partnerships in the best cases act as that coordinating body and that single table through which, say, a group of manufacturers can access the important support programs in their community. It's the opposite too, because if you have a strong sector partnership, say, of manufacturers in your region, that's a single table at which education, workforce, and economic development can access manufacturers. So it goes both ways, and that's really important to remember. In the best cases, sector partnerships create highly customized responses to a target industry's needs, and therefore highly accurate, results. Because if you're really so in touch with what your demand is saying is needed and is a priority, and if you're organized across multiple programs in education, workforce, and economic development, you should be seeing more accurate, more real-time responses that get you more accurate, real-time results for your workers and for your employers. They are about more than workforce training. They treat employers as partners, not just customers. We'll come back to that piece. And again, they're not just a grant program or a passing fad. They are long-term things. So one piece to know is that they're different from any of these. They're different from a state or local, it should say, workforce investment board, right? So just because your workforce investment boards have private sector engagement, they're not a sector partnership. That might seem obvious, but I do get this question sometimes. The big difference even with your regional or city economic development boards or your chambers of commerce, is that all of those entities focus on multiple different industries. And so they have private sector representation from healthcare as well as manufacturing, as well as retail or whatever it might be. And a sector partnership targets one industry. Now, there could be some variation depending on your region on just how you define advanced manufacturing, for example, or perhaps you have a sector partnership that exclusively focuses on long-term care facilities as opposed to ambulatory care, hospitals, and long-term care. Every region is going to be different, but fundamentally, it is critically important that a sector partnership really drills down into one target industry. And so your boards generally don't do that, right? They are a representation of across multiple industries. And therefore, they serve different purposes, and that's important. But they're also different from an industry association, which is, in fact, one target industry, right? And it's important to know that industry associations, and it's not the rule, there are exceptions to this, but generally they, first of all, can be statewide, so that makes them different, right, from a regional sector partnership. But they also generally have an agenda that focuses on policy changes, legislative, regulatory, and they often will have an agenda that focuses on things like marketing and branding. And so whether or not they truly get to an industry-driven agenda that touches on education and training issues at the level and depth that they should be or could be, it is the question. And so sector partnerships generally are very different from an industry or a trade association because of that. They, again, generally focus on things like policy changes and marketing and branding. They may not necessarily get to the education and training piece at the level that they should be or could be. And they don't necessarily coordinate with all of the other support partners like they could be or should be. And so you will not find community colleges, job centers, workforce boards, other economic development organizations, human service organizations, VR, et cetera, at that table. So that is a pretty big difference and an important difference. Can industry and trade associations, if they operate at the local level, be the convener of a strong sector partnership? In some cases, yes. In some cases, they are a very good choice. If they are willing to expand their agenda, really make sure that this is industry member driven and owned, and if they're able to coordinate and build trust across all of those necessary community support partners. And then finally, let me just touch on these two last ones. Sector partnerships are not your community college advisory boards, and they are not even a career pathway employer group. And this is an important piece to understand. The difference is that a community college advisory board is a board that is very specifically set up and required, right, to ask a group of employers to please confirm, is this curriculum, let's just say targeting machinists, right, and is the credential right? So it is an approval board, and you are asking a group of employers one very specific question, which is, can you look at this and help us understand if it's right? It's different from a sector partnership in that a good sector partnership is going to broaden that question significantly so that employers can actually create an agenda that they own and are bought into, and that then solutions and activities come out of there that are definitely going to relate to curriculum and credentials and probably building strong career pathways in the best cases. But they are not just asking the one question of, please approve or please help us build a credential, etc. So we'll come back to that. It's one I think that places all over the country are really wrestling with in terms of if I have a career pathway employer group, do I not already have a sector partnership? So we're going to come back to that, but I just wanted to introduce it here. All right, a little perspective. Where are sector partnerships? They're everywhere. There are thousands of sector partnerships across the country. Some are much more advanced than others. Some are much more industry-driven than others. But sector partnerships exist in every state. About half the states in the country over the past, I would say 6 to 8 years, have made some effort to really make sector partnerships the way to engage with industry. If you're a workforce area in particular, but more advanced states trying to bring together very specifically their education, economic development, and workforce partners into a sector partnership way of organizing. And there's a handful, I would say about a half dozen states that are really doing this effectively. And the key here is that states do have a role to play. It is not in implementation. That happens at the local level. But it is in creating the right conditions for local sector partnerships to succeed. And so that can be in shared vision, shared messaging. It can be in trainings and capacity building like Illinois went through last week. There's more to be done on that. It can be in creating really good tools like industry data tools, shared metrics tools. It's in creating learning networks across sector partnerships. So there's a state role that's critically important here, again, in creating the right conditions for sector partnerships to succeed. Another piece that would probably take a whole other webinar. But let me just jump to one state, and Colorado was part of the training last week, and so this is why we featured Colorado, but they represent one of the more cutting-edge states and sector strategies recently. And part of it is because they are really frankly, they've nailed it when it comes to creating the conditions for sector partnerships to succeed on the ground. And here's a map of their sector partnerships. They started their work very intensively about 2 years ago. They had a history like Illinois of sector partnerships and sector strategies, but 2 years ago they took a very different approach. They no longer could offer grants to local areas, and so instead they've done very intense training to all of their stakeholders around the state in education, workforce, and economic development. They've got 14 economic regions, and in each of their economic regions, they have active, emerging, and exploring sector partnerships. These partnerships have only come together because all of those partners in each region first came together to understand what is it that we already have going on, what do we need to have going on that we don't, because we clearly have target sectors that we need a partnership in, and can we come to agreement on who's going to be the lead convener and who's going to be the support partners. And it's been a powerful exercise for each of the regions to go through. And I think it's fair to say that they have accelerated this process probably faster than any other state in the nation, because they went through such consistent and common training, and because they were able to, in some cases for the first time, come to agreement on which target sectors warrant our collective action in the form of a formal sector partnership. Because not every industry does. And so a process that Colorado at the state level kind of led all of the regions through allowed the regions to self-select industries and self-organize, but in a really structured and consistent way. And that's why you see this map in front of you. Colorado, like other sector partnerships, are seeing lots of different kinds of results out of their sector partnerships. On the workforce side, some very specific education and training. So not only some clarity around the human capital issues of target industries at a regional level, but some short-term training, some shared training across companies, incumbent worker training and advancement training, as well as building some impressive career pathway systems for target industries at the regional level. They're also working on things like work experience and internships, apprenticeships. There's been some exciting non-training workforce solutions. I think sometimes when we think workforce solutions, we jump to training, but in fact, just getting job descriptions, for example, aligned across manufacturers in one region can open a significant bottleneck in recruitment. And so that's a terrific example of sometimes it's a non-training solution that we need to figure out. They never could have done that if they didn't have a group of companies coming together to discuss what's the problem, what are the issues, and how can we get to the bottom of this. There's economic development solutions too. We see shared marketing and branding. We see shared supply chain mapping. We see things like transportation efficiencies, even transportation co-ops developing across companies. For example, manufacturers saying we cannot afford to send our trucks out half full anymore. And we're all small and medium-sized manufacturers sending stuff to the same transportation hubs. Isn't there something we can do? What's amazing about that example is that it didn't take much to facilitate a conversation around, okay, what can you do? Companies, what can you do? And companies rolling up their sleeves and saying, I think we can pretty easily coordinate to get trucks full out to the same transportation hubs and actually realize some cost savings. So examples of non-training, non-education, but things that matter if you're really expecting companies to come together and hang together. And so it's important to look at those solutions that can come out of partnerships too. I'm going to just give two examples. There are lots, and I'm going to zip through this. But this is a Northern Colorado manufacturing partnership that is 2 years old this month. They launched in May of 2013. They are co-convened by a community college and an economic development organization. And this decision was a joint decision by the region. And what I mean by that is a team from northern Colorado, so Weld County and Larimer County of northern Colorado, came together, and this included the Weld County WIB, the Larimer County WIB, and their associated job centers. It included 5 different economic development organizations, 2 county, 2 city, and 1 regional economic development organization and chamber. It included 2 colleges, Ames Community College and Front Range Community College, and it also included CSU, Colorado State University. And they all came together and they discussed their industry data, and they realized manufacturing's hot, we got to do an organized partnership. And they set aside a lot of turf and some historical turf issues that were very, very real. And they said, we agree that Front Range Community College and this economic development organization shall be the lead conveners, and we will all sit around the table as strong support partners. And they started putting together an invite list, literally, of CEOs in manufacturing companies in Weld and Larimer counties. And they got 2 of those CEOs to join in on this endeavor to launch a Northern Colorado organized partnership. And in fact, it was those companies that sent the invite list and even hosted the meeting at their manufacturing facility that launched this partnership. It was facilitated through a pretty structured process that asked the question, what's going on in your industry in our region? Not the state, not the country, but in Weld and Larimer counties. What are the growth opportunities? Why are you growing as a company? And then they asked the question, if we were to leverage that growth opportunities or realize those growth opportunities, what would we have to do? And what would you have to do as companies? And this led to a set of priority actions that you see here. And the first one that they discussed was, we need more business-to-business networking. Straight up, we don't know each other enough, and we want to know each other more. And so they immediately highlighted that as one of their top priorities of this emerging partnership, including immediately launching into a way to better map their own supply chain. Some of them were suppliers. Some of them were larger companies that needed to know who's in my area and in my state that I could get supplies from. The second one, no surprise to folks who work with manufacturers, was changing the perception of the industry by youth and young people. Really letting them know there's good stuff going on in our companies and there's good jobs. They're high-tech, they're clean, they're not the dirty manufacturing that we think of from 50 years ago. And the third piece was a very, very intensive look at what are our most critical occupations, and they identified 10 in production and maintenance and quality control. And what do we really know about the very specific knowledge, skills, and abilities in those critical occupations? And so they have launched a process that has taken a year, but it has been industry-driven completely around uncovering the true KSAs, knowledge, skills, and abilities of those critical occupations. This has immediate repercussions for how the colleges and their 3 K-12 school districts who now sit at the table and Colorado State University make immediate changes to curriculum. And it has repercussions on how all of those educational institutions, including their workforce training partners, are actually building a career pathway system that appropriately connects their courses and credentials. They could have just taken a career pathway from somewhere else, right? From NAM or from a national organization. They could have just taken credentials from there. They could have gone to ONET and just pulled down job profiles. But when they did that, the manufacturers said, it's just not right. It just doesn't quite work for us. Something's off. And so they elected to create this themselves, and the results have really been astounding. So I'll leave it at that, but everything that I just described for NOCO, what they call themselves, is only, and here's their logo and some of their taglines, none of this could have happened if they didn't engage employers in the right way in the beginning around having them create their own agenda, as opposed to asking them questions like, can you please tell us all of your workforce challenges and your workforce issues? If they had done that, what they would have gotten was a list of issues and challenges and an expectation that education and workforce would then go solve those. And I highlight that because this is a critical distinction between what I call next generation sector partnerships and what traditionally I think has been our approach to try to create a demand-driven training system. If you ask them what their problems are, you get a list of problems and an expectation that you'll solve them. And you don't necessarily get a conversation that is ongoing with employers that actually helps them start owning the agenda of fixing some of these issues. And that's what we want in a strong sector partnership. So that's why the NOCO, the Northern Colorado Manufacturing example, I think is strong. For those of you who want to see, these are the 10 critical occupations that they identified last year. One more example is from Phoenix. And somebody did ask me in Illinois, don't you have examples from Illinois or from the Eastern Seaboard? And again, there are examples all over the country. These are two that I've chosen because they represent sector partnerships that developed of their own volition, no grants. They developed with true industry leadership, buy-in, and partnership, and they developed out of a really strong set of community support partners that came to agreement on how they were going to roll this out. So Phoenix Healthcare Sector Partnership is another terrific example. They now have over 150 members, which really represents the market of healthcare providers in the Phoenix area. But they have a core group of about 24 that really drive the agenda and the priorities. They have 4 areas of focus. One is growing the healthcare workforce. One is promoting overall wellness and quality of life. The third is strengthening healthcare innovation and care coordination. And the last is supplies, promoting medical tourism. So if you look at just the first ones, the first 3, the workforce, promoting wellness, and strengthening care coordination, these are 3 that came directly out of what every healthcare system is facing right now with the changes in the Affordable Care Act. Every healthcare system is expected to work better together because they are now being reimbursed based on whether patients return or don't return to their doors. And if you release a patient and 2 weeks later they're back in your emergency room, or even if they turn up at an urgent care in another clinic, your reimbursement is affected. And so there's a different pressure now on healthcare employers to work together to create an integrated care model. And so this is what they wanted to come around the table. They were highly competitive players, by the way. These were groups of providers. There had been mergers, hospitals, clinics that had never worked together before. So it took, just like the Northern Colorado Manufacturing example, it took a couple CEOs to say, I get that we need to have conversations together, and I will therefore put the invite out so that it doesn't come from a workforce board, it doesn't come from an economic development agency, it doesn't come from a college. It comes from a CEO of a hospital system saying, I am inviting you, competitor or peer, to this meeting. Won't you join this conversation about, are we growing, why are we growing, and what more can we do, and what do we need? So it was a very powerful start, and it has led to some very powerful outcomes, all of which I don't have time to get into, but it's safe to say that these industry members are rolling up their sleeves and participating with their workforce and education partners in ways that they've never done before, including designing their own workforce needs survey and getting a 90% return on what those needs, or on what that survey, which gives education and workforce providers probably the best understanding of what workforce needs in the healthcare industry are in the Phoenix area than they've ever had. And so that was one of the first things out of the gate that this partnership achieved. I'm going to move on to one more. This is a terrible slide, and I'll completely acknowledge that. I need an intern to help me with my slides. But here's the point of this slide. You heard me mention very briefly business-to-business networking. And this is an example of a sector partnership in a semi-rural area of Pennsylvania, Westmoreland, and Fayette counties. It's an energy-focused manufacturing partnership, so manufacturers that have some connection to energy efficiency, et cetera. What you see here are the results of company-to-company networking and exchanges. The conversations that literally happened on the way out to the car. So, that happened over coffee because the convener of this partnership realized the company-to-company connections are just as important as our discussions around a specific short-term training program or, a specific supply chain, a mapping endeavor. And just to highlight a couple of these, one of my favorites, the fifth one down, is Tri-State Biofuels. This was a small wood stove pellet manufacturer, and he had 5 employees. But in this partnership, he connected with some of the Marcellus Shale drilling companies, the oil and gas drilling companies. And they realized that the same technology used to make wood pellets is a technology that could be used to create these giant chemical absorption pads that can be used on a drilling site to absorb chemical waste during the drilling process. And voila, you have a new product. And what happens when you have a new product? When you have a new product line, you have new jobs. And so when they got this up and running, he added 25 new jobs. So he went from a 5-employee company to being a 30-employee company, and he tripled his sawdust purchases from local sawmills. So you can see the ripple effect here. Another example, World Kitchen, formerly Corningware. You all have that casserole dish in the back of your cupboard, or you have the Pyrex glass measuring cup. That's Corningware. It's now World Kitchen. They are not headquartered in this area, but they had a facility. And they were exploring the idea of creating solar panels using some of their Pyrex glass technology. And this was even during a time, a few years ago, when Chinese solar panels were flooding the domestic market. But because of connections they made in this Green Alliance partnership, they were able to troubleshoot and realize the potential of this product line, and they got it up and running. And in 18 months, they added 60 new jobs as a result. This is purely an example of, if you have a sector partnership where you can really facilitate and allow and be the forum for company-to-company networking, you have powerful impact on actually growing that target sector and growing your economy. So the lead convener, Sean Kleipold, who is the WIB director, and he partners with his economic development organization in his community to convene this partnership. He will say, I started tracking this religiously. I started tracking what's coming out of company-to-company interactions and conversations. And he now has a whole return on investment formula that he uses that basically says these are the number of jobs that came out of the new products, that came out of the new ideas, that came out of the company-to-company interactions in our partnership. And he sends this, by the way, to his congressman on a quarterly basis in terms of return on investment for salaries and jobs added to his community. So you can see that this stuff can be a pretty big deal if you are approaching this as, are we using this as a forum for company to connect connections and as a forum for them to create agendas that set their own priorities and then moving on these priorities. So here's a snapshot and a summary. I've touched on most of these, but this is kind of what I call the playbook, because I think there is a playbook. You know, we always say there's no one way to do this, and I think that's true because every region is different and every industry is different, but there is a playbook, and this is it. This is what works well and not so well when you are talking sector partnerships. We're talking clusters of companies, not individual firms. We're talking about finding ways to invite companies to participate as partners, not just customers. These things do have to be industry-driven, not system-driven. They are regional. They operate because you've recognized that there is a particular industry strength in your region. Maybe it's manufacturing. It's probably healthcare. Every region, in my opinion, should have a healthcare partnership up and running. It could be any other industry that really drives a regional economy. The focus is on more than just workforce. It's focused on what really makes this industry competitive in this region. I think it's critically important that we talk opportunity and not just problem. You want to engage employers around what are your opportunities to grow and what are you going to do to really leverage those opportunities. And you'll get folks engaging as partners, going back to the second one on this slide. They're champion-driven, not just representation. I skipped one, I'm sorry. Employer priorities first, target population first. This is a really important one, and it's a hard pill to swallow because target populations matter more than ever, right? We are back in a good economy, and we worry that we are once again going to leave behind people who are not successfully gaining a foothold in the labor market. But here's what we know. We know that if we are trying to push these individuals onto the labor market, as opposed to using the pull of the labor market to get these people jobs, to get these people trained appropriately, and all the supports that go along with that, and then get them placed, then we're doing a disservice to our target populations. And so perhaps more than ever, we get that we have to be paying critically close attention to what the demand actually is if we are going to create opportunities in training and supports that prepare whoever we're talking about, whether it be opportunity youth, ex-felons, returning veterans, etc. We must be preparing them based on the real demand of the labor market, as opposed to relying on the one or two employers who are really good people and willing to give our people a chance. So this is tough because we for decades have taken an approach of target populations first, and when I say employer priorities first, I mean use the pull of the labor market and the pull of demand to appropriately train up and prepare our target populations to get these jobs. And we see far more success than how we have sometimes traditionally approached this. But it takes a significant shift, and it takes a lot of behind-the-scenes work to make sure we're getting the appropriate training and supports for our target population. So moving on, these are champion-driven, not representation-oriented. Here's what that means. It means that you are looking for CEOs and leaders in companies who are willing to engage and participate, and you will find them. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you're targeting every single manufacturer in your region. First of all, in some of your regions, that would be thousands, and so that's not going to work, right? And so what you're looking for are people who share some characteristics. One, are they passionate about their company and their industry? Two, are they passionate about their community? And three, do you just know that these people are interested and willing to engage in an endeavor like this? And generally, when you ask those questions to workforce education, economic development stakeholders on the ground, they already have a list of people, of CEOs and companies they've worked with in the past who fit that bill. And so getting a partnership up and running and starting with those people can make a huge difference in actually getting something started and getting employers to really roll up their sleeves. So that leads directly to, is this a coalition of the willing versus what I like to call the futile search for consensus? And what we're looking for is coalitions of the willing. You're not going to get everybody, and this is what I tell regions everywhere. You're not going to get everybody right away. Don't worry about that. We spend an awful lot of time worried because we didn't get the 100 people we invited in our room. If you get 25 companies in a room, go with it. And in some regions that will be less. There's no magic number. You want to build with what you have. This is about people, not just checking off the boxes of do we have all the right organizations and jurisdictions. So that goes back to really making sure you're identifying champions. But that goes for public programs too. There are some public programs and leaders in those programs who just may not be willing to play the game right away. And so are you as a convener or a regional team making decisions about sector partnerships going to shut everything down because of that? No, you're going to keep going. Finally, this is a disciplined, replicable process. It is not a mysterious, unique occurrence. All the time, I think we hear, that's great that happened in Phoenix, it can't happen here. Or that's great that happened in Fort Collins, Colorado, but we're different. And the reality is that every region and every industry is different. But there is a process and a playbook, I will say, that you can get through that really helps. So we're going to zip through the rest of the slides. I warned you this was a hefty presentation, but we will certainly have time for Q&A, so hang with me just a little longer and we will get to that in probably about 5 minutes. Here's a slide that we used last week just because I think when we start talking about employers as partners, not just customers, we get questions about, so what does that really mean? And so this hopefully helps a little bit. We're talking about leadership in developing the agenda and the priorities. We're talking about partnership in two ways. They're willing to collaborate together, and they're willing to partner with support partners. And we're talking about commitment. And that's in actually implementing some of the action areas and the solutions. And this takes their time, it takes their in-kind and their financial commitments. And so that's what we mean by industry as partners, not just customers. And we do see around the country that there's a lot of companies who are willing to play this game. So let me just back up, and this will be the final piece. And I'm going to ask that you may have thought we were kind of at a 30,000-foot level. I'll ask you to go even higher here to kind of a 50,000-foot level, because what we're realizing is that there's a reason sector partnerships are hot again. They were hot for a while, and then they kind of went cooler, and now they're hot again, and you see it everywhere. You see it in WIOA. You see it in calls to action, no matter what system you work in every day. And there's reasons, and you can see them here, but what I want to jump to is some history again. Across the country, here's what we know. Education, and this may not be true in Illinois, but it's true around the country, has historically relied on a train and pray culture. And that means we are not here to get people jobs. We are here to educate. But what we realize today is that, in fact, education plays a critical, if not the most critical role in actually getting a person a job. And so it does matter. And so career pathways have become the way educators are viewing their work. But the difference between the career pathway conversation of today from years past is that we're talking about building career pathway systems, not programs. So it's not enough that a high school will develop programs of study within certain career clusters. It's not enough that adult basic education partner with CTE, for example, to build a career pathway program in a particular target industry or career cluster. What must happen is that all of these entities have to work together in a shared framework. The shared framework is a target industry. But it's high schools, it's ABE, it's workforce training, it's organized labor training and apprenticeships, it's colleges, community and technical, it's universities, and probably others not on here, that must be working in step and in sync to truly build the appropriate sequence of courses and credentials that align with the natural advancement of a target industry. And so a career pathway system is very different from a career pathway program as we have historically thought about it. And the best education systems are approaching this work very differently as a result. If we look at economic development, historically it's been about business attraction. If there's an economic development organization who is almost exclusively focusing on recruiting companies to their region or state, I would venture to say that they are pretty old school. Because what economic development realizes, in the best cases, is going back, if you will, to the concept of a good industry cluster. And that means that small, medium, and large companies, even in this global virtually connected economy, still cluster together for a reason. They share markets, they share supply chains, they share technology and infrastructure, and one of the most important is that they share a skilled labor pool. And so the best economic development organizations today are realizing that this, therefore, must be their whole agenda. Their agenda has to be addressing each of these pieces: markets, supply, infrastructure, technology, and skilled labor. And this is why you're seeing a lot of organizations now, including chambers of commerce, addressing the talent and the labor issue so aggressively. And that's a good thing. What we have to make sure we do, of course, is make sure it's not in isolation from other industry-targeted efforts that might be driven out of other systems. In workforce, traditionally, we've been about customized business training and job matching, and in some places we've done this really, really well. But if we look at WIOA and just the trend and where I think some of the best workforce areas have gone, we are coming to sector partnerships. And there's a reason for that, of course, right, is that good workforce areas and good workforce investment boards at the local level have always been the place where education, workforce, and economic development could come together. And I think what we see now is that sector partnerships very much fit that bill. They are a way to bring these three systems together. And so in many places around the country, and what you see in WIOA is a direct call to action for workforce areas to play this role. You will also see in WIOA, there's always an exception to the rule, that in some places, workforce areas should be strong support to a good sector partnership and not necessarily the lead convener. And we can go down that route probably at another time because it's a whole other conversation. But for the purposes of today and wrapping up, what we're seeing is that there's a place and a way that all this finally comes together. And this is really important. Because for a long time, and still, you will find where education feels ownership over career pathways, and economic development feels ownership over clusters. And the reality is that if you think of sector partnerships as an organizing vehicle, they are the way to bring all of these pieces together. And so in the best cases around the country, you're seeing sector partnerships as sort of the keystone to connecting career pathway systems building to actual growth of your industry cluster. And so as the examples I've given describe, if you are pulling employers and companies from your regional target industry cluster, let's say it's manufacturing, you're going to immediately see reverberation back. And the Pennsylvania example is a terrific example of that, of where they're already sharing ideas and innovation and actually creating new product lines and new jobs. And the target industry cluster in that region as a result is actually growing. That's real economic development. That's real growth. But if they also have all of the coordinating partners sitting around this table and hearing and listening the same priorities and drives and agendas from the target sector, you've already got the table through which you should be building your career pathway system. And so in the best cases, strong sector partnerships become the organizing vehicle to build career pathway systems that in fact feed into the real jobs in your target cluster in your region. And you can see, therefore, how they become a centerpiece to pulling all of these pieces together. And so that's where we want to end, and I'll wrap this up. Again, it's kind of a 50,000-foot level, but I'm hoping it's a new mental model and a vision for how these pieces fit together, as opposed to still seeing career pathway systems in isolation or being an education thing, and seeing how sector partnerships play a role in career pathway systems building, as well as just direct growth of your target sector in your region. There are other slides. We won't get to them. That's okay. I will just touch on this piece. This was a piece that we introduced folks last week to, which was a framework for Illinois on sector partnerships. I think this can all be sent out to you. Much of this is the material that I just presented, but it is in a written document that was prepared for Illinois as part of this work. So with that, let's get some questions. And thanks everybody for your patience as I got through all of them.
I have a question. So at the local level, would they develop the sector priorities or the sector partnerships? Or I guess the industry would do that. Who would do all the gathering at first? Whose mission would that be? That makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and basically, sorry, I was hoping I had a slide on that. But at the local level, there are a few steps that have to be taken. One, and I think we started this last week. One, our education, workforce, and economic development partners in a region, just choose one region, getting together and coming to some agreement on, do we want a manufacturing partnership, a healthcare partnership? What are, let's say, the top 3 industries we think we want a sector partnership in? That's step 1. Step 2 would be, okay, great. Who among us makes the most sense to be the coordinator or the convener to kind of get this off the ground? Step 3 is, great, we now agree that we are going to launch a manufacturing sector partnership together, and that it is our local, I'm making this up as an example, economic development agency, the organization that's going to be the lead convener, and we all, as workforce partners and education partners, are going to support this. We collectively will then generate an invite list. Like, it gets that practical and tactical, right? And we're going to identify probably 2 CEOs in manufacturing companies in our region that can help us develop this invite list and then send the invite out that says, in a nutshell, won't you join our sector partnership? Here's what we're launching. Here's what we're up to. And then there is absolutely a set of steps that can be taken. There's different ways to doing this, but you want to basically get a good critical mass of manufacturers in your region then in a room, and it is those manufacturers who will set their own agenda for their partnership. This takes facilitation, right? So somebody has to facilitate this, and either it's the convener, the economic development organization who's taking the lead, or maybe it's somebody who's just really good at facilitation, because there can be a distinction there. The facilitation is critical in pulling out what is happening in your industry and what can we develop as priorities. You're immediately going to get into education and training priorities, and you want your facilitator to begin pulling out what is it that you need. What are we talking about? Short-term training, long-term training, apprenticeships. You need more work experience. You start talking about internships. We could make this up. We don't want to make it up. We want the employers to tell us, and you can do that pretty powerfully if you really get a good facilitator and you get a good group of manufacturers in the room to develop that agenda and that set of priorities. So they are the ones who develop that. Did that help?
Yeah.
Question. Any other questions? What kind of cracked open for any of you just from this presentation, or what other very tactical, practical questions like that one do you have?
You mentioned that the successes were great. How do you measure those successes? Is it job creation? Is it in terms of the growth of businesses? How is success measured in this model?
Great question, and that also is a whole other area. And sector partnerships around the country generally try to measure their success across a few categories. One, direct impact on employers. Two, impact on job seekers and workers. And then a third one that I'm seeing is impact on public programs and use of those public programs. This is an area, metrics overall, that the state of Illinois can play a pretty powerful role around. You don't want to create metrics that calcify sector partnerships into one way of doing things, but you can certainly create good guiding tools. And so you can do things like, what are the top indicators from your sector partnership that's really going to tell us there was an impact on employers? And so maybe that's increases in productivity. Maybe that's increased networking and, as a result, new idea and product line. For impact on workers, we go back to some of our traditional workforce measures, like did the education and training programs and credentials that came out of our sector partnership, did we see results in terms of job seekers getting more credentials and actually getting placed in the field that they were trained? Were there advancement opportunities for existing incumbent workers if we're doing incumbent worker training? So things like that. And then there's also some measures around, are we just seeing better use of our public programs because we are working better together, as a partnership, as community support partners? And that's a whole other category that we're seeing sector partnerships self-measure on.
It's interesting. Lizzie, this is John. As a follow-up question, do you know in Colorado or any other areas that are more advanced, are they tracking those job seeker placements with companies that are involved with sector partnerships?
They are on track to do that. It is a work in progress right now. In fact, this summer, Colorado in particular is going through a pilot phase of piloting a set of performance indicators. And one of those will be exactly what you just said, which is, can we track back, by looking at our job seeker and student placements in companies, can we track it back to our sector partnership to try to make a connection? Yes.
Right. Well, I think that'd be something we'd be interested in, as we're looking at developing or redeveloping our systems.
I think it would be really, really good to look at, and I know that Colorado would be willing to share that.
So are there other support tools, speaking of technology, are there other support tools that places like Colorado perhaps uses, like dashboards or other, types of things that are like kind of like a statewide coordination, or is it more, everything is local, everything is regional?
There are definitely tools, and in fact, the slide I just put up is kind of the overview of the role of state leadership here, and you'll see, number 2, good industry data and analysis of performance metrics tools, training and capacity building. And so to answer your question, John, yes, and Colorado is one of the best, I will say, but there are other states doing this too. Massachusetts has always done a good job of this. Kentucky has some very good tools. And then there's a handful of others. But the state can do a lot. The state can not only create things like guidance around metrics and performance, but you can also create very good, easy-to-use, this is key, industry data tools that regional teams can use together to make decisions about what target industry are we even talking about. And that's a very powerful way. The other pieces are, there's training and capacity building tools. If you go to Colorado's website. I think it's sectorssummit.com, and you may have seen that. They have created lots of tools. They've got videos of some of their best partnerships, which is a marketing tool on a number of levels, right? They can use this with policymakers. They can use it with other employers. Even the local partnerships can say, hey, check out our video. Don't you want to be engaged with this? They can use it to build the buzz about what good sector partnerships are. They've got training tools like, here's a sample agenda. If you're launching a sector partnership, here's a sample agenda of your first meeting with employers, and here's facilitation tips. They've got a convener workbook that basically says, if you're the convener of a sector partnership, here's your scope of work, here's your job description, here's step one, in the life cycle of a good sector partnership and what you're engaging in and starting on. So there's a lot there, and I think at a state level, this is a role that you guys should be considering pretty seriously.
I think to add on to what John was saying, we talked about this in the last week. This is Pat Campbell, and we talked about Massachusetts and Ken Messina, and their data system and analysis there is outstanding. And I don't know whether you have anything else to add about that, but I know you mentioned them a little bit when we were talking last week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great model. I would also look at Oregon created a really easy-to-use industry data tool, and they created one for each of their economic regions that, again, it was intended to be used by groups of stakeholders, a team of stakeholders in each region to make decisions about their data. They continually come back to this tool and use it, even though they've already made a decision, for example, to launch a technology partnership and that's up and running. They come back to this tool to make decisions about their next target sector or, to look into more detail around, well, what type of manufacturing do we really have here? So I think Oregon's a great example, too, and there are other states as well, but that's one that I would highlight.
Lindsay, this is Miriam. You mentioned mapping out the KSAs. Are there, besides, as you mentioned, ONET, are there sample or template type KSAs, or do you recommend that be developed at a local employer-by-employer conversation?
I recommend that it be local and in a sector partnership conversation. It would be impossible to go one employer at a time. But it's true that I think across the country we have relied on ONET for maybe reasons that we shouldn't be relying on it. ONET's a really awesome resource. It is so critically important, but we can't just take it at face value and assume that every manufacturer, for example, is going to say, yeah, every single, that 20-page profile on CNC machinist is totally accurate and right. And I think there's a process that has been around for years that's a skill standards process. It is very resource intensive. If any of you have ever been through, like the DACA model, I think that there are lessons learned recently and even some stuff happening in the field now that kind of accelerates that. So it's an in-between just grabbing it off of ONET and doing the incredibly intensive, resource-intensive, skill standards process. So the example I gave in northern Colorado, I think, is kind of an in-between there. This is all being played out, which is interesting. I think some different testing of this. But
do they have any of those posted on their website, or are there examples?
Northern Colorado does not yet, but they will very soon. I just touched base with them to ask that same question. When can we see this? And they're actually developing their reports and materials this month, and I think they were aiming to get it out at the end of this month, so soon. But I'm guessing it's going to be in June, and so I will definitely share those if I can get a hold of them.
Thank you.
Other questions, or what kind of cracked open for you as you heard all this material? I do see a question in the main chat. Talent pipeline, does this include military branches and service academies? I think that's a really good question. I certainly have seen sector partnerships for doing a much better job connecting with not only sort of military training, but or I will say military training, but also obviously just tapping into trained veterans, which is a really important piece. So I think this is an area where we need to do a much, much better job, and there's just a few examples where I've seen it.
Hey, Lindsay, can you hear us?
Yes.
This is Mike. So I accidentally cut our line off. I was about to ask a question. I know it could work either way, but is there any data out there yet on, or do you have an opinion on, is it better to start ad hoc or with more formal agreements? Any data that says one is better than the other?
I don't think there's data, but of course I'll give you my opinion. I have seen in the past years that what is successful about these, what I call next generation partnerships, and part of the reason I call them next generation partnerships, again, is that they are developing of their own volition, and again, without a grant. And I highlight that because the examples we have where there were formal agreements in the very beginning are usually because there was a grant, right, that required letters of support or even stronger memorandums of agreement, et cetera, before you even kind of got the thing launched. And I don't see a lot of success with that. I mean, unless you have an endless supply of ongoing grant money, you're putting yourself into a bit of a pickle. What I see is that if you get regional partners, support partners agreeing to do this work in an organized, structured way, but then you are relying on a good group of employers from a target sector to come together and in some ways very organically discuss, create, and name their priorities, you have a much stronger starting place. And I think from there, my advice, and I use this a lot, is you then, as the convener or the support organization, you want to create just enough organization. And you want the employers to name what that is. So you're going to find that in some cases, and I see this with healthcare a lot because I think it's just the culture of healthcare, they want structure. So they've got their first meeting, they've got their priorities, they are bought in and they're excited. And there's guaranteed somebody's going to raise their hand in the last 10 minutes of that first meeting and say, wait. So what are we? Are we a partnership? Are we an alliance, an association? How are we organizing, et cetera? And I find that you want to go with that. You want to say, well, how do you want to organize? Do you want structure? Do you want to organize as a 501c6 or C3? I've seen both of those examples. Do you want to be an official, something association with MOUs, et cetera? And let them answer that question. But in other cases, I will see, and I see this with manufacturing often, they want to just, this is great. We're excited. We're bought in. We've got some stuff we're going to move on. But it often takes a good year of them working together and growing their own legs and getting some early wins and figuring out this and what it looks like before they start naming structure and organization and formalities. And you just want to go with what they are saying. This is their partnership. It is not ours, right? And so you really want to respect that, and the structure kind of has to respect that too.
I think that To follow up on that, I think that's obviously the ideal, that organic conversation that's business-driven. I guess the question that I have is, how do you get that ball rolling with business if you don't have a formal organizing principle? You know, like, how do you get them to understand that it's worth their time and that you're going to drive towards that organic conversation is going to drive towards a value add for them?
Yeah, I totally get that, and it's always kind of a tightrope that you're walking. And what I would invite you to consider is that this is where I do think there is a replicable process here. And if you are bringing together a good, critical mass of employers in one target sector and in one region, and if you are facilitating a conversation that really walks them through their own growth opportunities and growth potential, directly leading into, great, what does that mean if we were to really do something collectively, what would those priority actions be? And then don't let them leave that meeting without committing to fleshing out those priority areas and rolling up their sleeves on a next step. And here's the thing. This can happen with a good facilitator. It should happen. My experience is that employers who participate in that 90-minute, 2-hour meeting that's facilitated in that way, they walk out of there feeling very much like they've just created an agenda that they're bought into, and they do commit. And so the structure piece happens very quickly as a result. I mean, they really kind of feel like we are going to hang together because we get that we just created our own agenda, and nobody else is going to implement this for us. Otherwise this was just a nice conversation, and that's that. So I don't know the better answer except for when you shift the questions to that, you do have them walk out with a feeling of ownership that has them hang together. And if they create something structured and a set of guiding principles and organizing principles right away, that's great. If they don't, I generally see it pretty quickly, within 6 months to a year.
Great, thank you.
So I'm seeing that we are just at time here. Any quick questions or any wrap-up questions before we adjourn?
Well, Lindsay, this is John. I just want to, thank you for taking the time to walk through this. I realize this was, scratching the surface. Again, want to reiterate the importance of this as part of our WIOA implementation strategy, state level and the local level, many different layers. This information is going to be available for everyone. You probably saw there's a WorkNet page on this. And Mike Baker, if you're still on, do you want to just give everybody just kind of context of next steps, what to expect as far as what our plan with the sector strategies are?
Sure, John. The immediate next step is a survey to the local participants that came to the meetings in our workforce areas and college partners. Now that we have given them this information and now they know what they didn't know, now we want them to kind of assess where they're at and what they're doing and what they feel their capacity is to embark down this road. Then when we get that feedback from them, we are going to put together some regional and then potentially a statewide summit, maybe around September or so. And we're going to pull all the partners together in one ginormous meeting and kind of walk through, okay, this is a key step as far as WIOA implementation and the planning goes. So we want everybody in the same room to hear the same message, ask the same questions. And once that's done, then we can start one-on-one technical assistance with the local areas as needed. Because we'll have some that say, hey, we're ready to go, and we want to make sure that we help them. And then the folks that aren't quite ready yet, we want to work with them in a different way to get them up to speed and so they're ready to jump off the cliff.
Are you going to do it by OEA? Or a regional.
At region.
Yeah, regional, and then there will be a statewide summit at some point.
And then they're going to be the ones who are going to contact, like, your businesses and employers and stuff in their areas to try to get them to buy in.
Eventually, but the summit that we have won't necessarily include employers.
Right.
Because it's up to them at the local area to find that key convener.
Right.
So basically, we want to, at the training that we've done so far this last week, basically we got the folks that they always sent, right? You got your Kathy Lively's, your Pat Farah's, those types. We want it so that the line workers, the case managers, the people that actually are talking to the businesses, that are talking to the job seekers, understand how this all works.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, much more in depth.
Right.
So the way I understand what you're saying, Mike, is that there, this is an introduction to this, but, we want to be careful. I mean, based on the presentation, we want to be careful about, who's taking charge of this, because then it's our agenda or, Kathy Lively's or Pat Farah's agenda and not the business's agenda. And so we're back to square one where we just are having our same old kind of board meetings and stuff like that. So that's going to be...
Great point, Patrick.
It sounds like this is simply an introduction for everyone to kind of plant the seed, but carefully, I don't want to say backing away, but introducing and then letting them draw their own conclusions or fanning it so not one single agenda is at the forefront.
Right. Absolutely. And I think, I think that's where, additional hands-on technical assistance, multiple, throughout the regions, there'll be technical assistance as the different areas need it, right, as they go to implement this.
Yeah, it goes back to what Lindsay first talked about, that we don't want them going out and each doing their own thing with this.
Right.
There's got to be a way for them to find that convener and work in a collaborative fashion. And I would hazard a guess that a lot of our technical assistance is going to be a repeated hammering of the message.
Yeah.
Workforce doesn't necessarily lead this.
Yeah. Right. Yes. Yes, I agree with that 100%.
But it may. It depends on what the local situation is. So we have to give them a framework, but they have to have a big enough box in the maneuver so that it really is a locally run, industry-run initiative.
I think lead is a bad word for it. I think offer up or continuing to offer information or technical assistance from a variety of folks.
Yeah. Well, again, Lindsay and Lynn, thank you for your time and going through this information and working with our team and Mike for all of your work in developing this as it's rolled out. We'll send out the link to the workNet website, and we'll also follow up with the printed materials. And even though it may be your outside of your specific area, I'm looking at kind of one of the monitoring folks. Again, want to emphasize it's important to get a context of where we're going and kind of where the vision is. So with that, unless there's any other questions, thank everyone and have a great afternoon. Lindsay or Lynn, do you have any final words?
This is Lindsay. No, thanks everybody. And your questions were fantastic, and this last part of this conversation I think is really encouraging. So I think you guys are on a strong track.
Great.
Thanks, everybody.
Great. Bye.
Springfield signing off.